Hi, I'm Doug Couchman, and today I'm going to be answering a few questions about the LSAT.
Dad, how does the LSAT differ from other standardized tests?
Several ways. The LSAT differs from other standardized tests primarily in my experience, and I've taken the LSAT, I've taken all of the major tests, in that it's really all about time. Not all about time, of course, you have to get the questions right, but on the LSAT, more than any other standardized test, you, and by you I mean everybody I've ever known, are under serious time pressure. You have to hurry. Everyone has to hurry, always. And that's frustrating. And learning to deal with that while being accurate, not get flustered, um, but to hurry, hurry, move, move, move is very difficult. It also involves about 95% of my students over the years have gotten the best possible score by not answering all the questions. And that's so hard for smart people who have learned over the years that they're good at tests. Yeah, you're still good at the LSAT, but you're not expected to get all the questions right. You're not even expected to get to all the questions. So that, I think, is the primary difference between the LSAT and other tests.
On average, how many hours does a student spend preparing for the LSAT?
Right?
That is, if he or she wants to do well.
How many hours does the average student spend on the LSAT, assuming he or she wants to do well? Of course, there's no average student, yada yada. We've heard all that. Realistically, some people, of course, go in and take it cold. Some people study for months and months and months, and I've worked with people like that. For most of them, it's not a good idea. And realistically, most people are studying somewhere in the 6 to 10 week range. Of course, there's no actual subject matter on the LSAT. It's not like, say, the MCAT, where you've got to know your organic chemistry, and you do. On the LSAT, you don't have to know anything. But still, being familiar with the tests, familiar with the techniques you're going to apply to the analytical reasoning games is important. And for most people, we're looking at a couple months, between 6 and 10 weeks.
How is the LSAT organized?
How is the LSAT organized? It's fairly simple. The student is going to see 5 sections, each 35 minutes long, with essentially zero break in between sections 1 and 2, sections 2 and 3. Zero break, I mean, literally, they tell you turn the page, start the next section, and then a 10-minute break. 2 more sections of 35 minutes, and then finally a writing sample, which luckily is almost irrelevant. The 5 sections randomly distributed within those 5 sections, what you're going to see are one analytical reasoning section, which everybody in the world calls logical games or logic games or something like that. One reading comprehension section, and two, what the LSAT calls logical reasoning section. That's consists of about 25 questions where there's a paragraph or so, and then a question about that paragraph. Each section has about 25 questions. The total number of questions will be 101. But that's 4 sections, and I just described 5. There's also a 5th section somewhere in there randomly that is an experimental section. The LSAC.org is experimenting, deciding what to do next time, and that could be a reading comprehension section, an analytical reasoning game section, a logical reasoning section. And when you're taking the test, in general, you're not going to know you're taking an experimental section. So you see 5 of these 25 question-ish, 35-minute sections. 4 of those 5 sections count. Then, as I said, there's a writing sample, handwritten. You have half an hour to basically write a quick page. You're not worried at that point, you're done. But the 5 sections that go before that are the important ones.
I'll have a few more questions about specific sections later on. But for now, can you tell me how long is the LSAT?
How
What
long
should
is it?
I
Sorry.
what should I expect on test day?
Well, how long is it? Of course, it's 35 minutes times 5. So that's 175 minutes, 3 hours of testing. There's that 10-minute break in between. Notice, really only 10 minutes. It's not enough time to relax. It's enough time, basically, to go pee, and take a drink of water, and maybe snack on a breakfast bar or something. So I have to tell you, and I remember the time I took the LSAT way back in the 90s when I was going to law school, I did not know what to expect. And I sat down, and somewhere about the 15 or 20 minute point, I realized, oh my gosh, this is the hardest test I've ever seen. I'm not sure I'm going to finish. And that was 20 minutes in. And of course, so 175 minutes in, I was exhausted. So was everybody else. Everybody got it and said, oh my God, it's a big deal. And I'm, again, not even counting the writing sample, where everybody's going to coast because it basically does not affect your chances of getting into law school. What you should expect on test day, pretty much what I just said. It's my goal is not to scare you, but I think people should understand this experience is going to be really difficult. Now, it's going to be a lot less difficult if you're really prepared and you know it. But nothing, no amount of preparation, no amount of just plain being good at this stuff will make it easy. So you should expect to be exhausted. You should expect to be glad it's over. But you're basically going to have to sprint for 3 hours.
How should I start my LSAT preparation?
How should you start your LSAT preparations? It depends on how far from now you're planning on taking the LSAT. As I said earlier, 6 to 10 weeks is about the right amount of time to prepare. There's a subtlety to that. If you are far out from your test day, you know you're going to take it sometime next year, but you got 6 months or a year or something like that. What you should do is read, because the reading comprehension section on the test is the hardest at which to improve, but you can improve, and one of the central components of improving is reading a lot of difficult stuff. I and everybody else I know says get a subscription to The Economist and read The Economist cover to cover all the time, every week or something. The Economist isn't cheap, but something like that. Read dense material that ideally, and I know this sounds weird, but ideally dense material that doesn't interest you, stuff that you really couldn't care less about, and read it fast, but for comprehension. Do that. All right, now once you're within the 10 weeks, now you should start preparing, and now you need to do several things. You need to get, for the analytical reasoning, which I'm going to stop calling analytical reasoning, and I'm just going to say games. For the games, you have to have a structure, a way in which you're going to attack these things, and you have to get it. You get it from a book, you get it from the class from one of the big companies, you get it from me, you get it somewhere. Designing your own is probably a pretty bad idea, and having none is definitely a really bad idea. And then logical reasoning, which is those paragraph arguments, how you do it, you get actual LSATs, recent LSATs. Some of those books that are out there that you can get on Amazon, they've got real LSAT questions, from 20 years ago, and the LSAT is different now. So you get actual questions and do the questions. Start out doing them slowly. No, people think, oh, well, I need to take a practice test every week. No, you don't. What you need to do is get better at this. And then in the final 4, 5, 6 weeks or so, you start taking a practice section now and then, and eventually work up to full practice tests.
How important is the LSAT score?
How important is the LSAT score? Well, if you want to go to law school, you can go. You basically take the LSAT, sign your name, and Scantron randomly, and some law school will take you. However, if you'd like to actually be employed as a lawyer, you're going to want to go to a higher ranked law school. And now, how important the LSAT is? It's absolutely critical. For most students, there are 2 things that determine what law school he or she gets to go to. And those 2 things are your grade point average as an undergraduate and your LSAT score. There are lots of other things on any college application, but for law school, more than any of the other graduate programs, it's really about numbers. And right now, your GPA, either you're out of school and there's nothing you can do about it, or you're still in school and there's almost nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. But the LSAT score absolutely can make or break an application. If you want to go to absolutely top school, you must have a good LSAT score. If you want to go to the best law school you can get into, which you should, it's about the LSAT score. So it's absolutely critical. No recommendations are going to make up for it. No awesome personal statement is going to make up for it. you've got relevant legal experience, they really don't care much. I know they lie. You need to do well on the test.
I've heard about the infamous logic games. What's the best way to approach them?
All right, I alluded to those earlier, the infamous logic games, and they are. I think that the logic games is what drives more students to me right now, to the Princeton Review when I was with them, to Kaplan when I was with them, to everybody, to the books, and crazy. It's all the logic games. Because they look intimidating, and they look intimidating because they are intimidating. And if you don't have a strategy, they're intimidating for the good reason that they're hard. They really, just about nobody can just look at one. And, well, I've always done well on the Dell crossword puzzle book logic thing. Yeah, these are hard. So what's important is, first of all, realize that they're hard, and need to be taken seriously. And then, most importantly, you really need a structured approach. Even on lsac.org, they suggest that you might consider highlighting text and making some diagrams. And highlighting text, okay, fine. But making a diagram is, in my opinion, necessary for, I've only known one person ever who could do okay on these games without doing those diagrams. So you need some structure of symbols. Where do you get that? You could make them up, and I think that's an awful idea. Assuming you're a busy person who is not already an expert in the LSAT, there are other people who've done it, and you should just take one of those. Choose one. And now we choose according to our budgets. If you've got $50 and that's all, you could watch my videos, and that will help. Another thing you can do is get a book on Amazon and just learn it. If you've got $1,000, then I think that you should probably take one of the commercial courses. They're not bad, and they're better than you can do on your own. And you're taking them for several reasons, but probably the single most important reason is you're going to learn how they structure their diagrams to do the LSAT games, and you're going to follow it. And if you have more time, more budget, there are other ways. Private tutoring is great. But the fundamental answer is you've got to have a structure. Else you're either going to do poorly or you're going to be lucky. And if you're going into the LSAT planning on being lucky, then good luck.
What should I expect in the argument section?
The argument section. What should you expect in the argument section? The argument section is technically the logical reasoning section, and I always actually get confused, even after it's been 20 years now, of logical reasoning versus analytical reasoning. Basically, we all call them arguments. It's a paragraph, or occasionally two. It could be even as short as 3 or 4 lines. A question about that, and there are, depending on who's counting, 16 or 17 or 13 or whatever, different kinds of questions they can ask. And then 5 answer choices. And then I should have mentioned every question on every section of the LSAT is a multiple choice question with 5 answer choices, A, B, C, D, E. So you're going to get that. And what you should expect is 25-ish, it varies from 24 to 27, questions on this section. Starting out, on average, you're easier. Although it's kind of, you might get a hard question at question 3, it happens. And ranging up toward the end of the section to, wow, that's really, what was the question again? Difficult. And the approach there, the proper approach, remember I said there were 13 or 16 or 17, I'd say 16, different kinds of questions they can ask. You know what those kinds of questions are. So you start out reading what we call the question stem, and see, oh, this time they're asking, which of the following would weaken that? It's a weaken question. And then you know an approach for weaken questions. And you know an approach for each one of those 16 types, and you just do it. And you get down to 2, or ideally you get down to 1 most of the time. And then you apply excellent process of elimination techniques, and really that becomes the most important thing. And then the final thing you should expect is you realize the proctor gives you the 5 minutes to go warning, and you realize you're not going to finish. You're going to leave 1 or 2 questions unanswered. That, on average, is where people finish. And that's okay. It's not going to stop you from going to law school. it's not going to stop you from going to Yale. You can get an excellent score on the LSAT while finishing none of the sections, and you should expect that this is going to be tough to finish.
Is there anything different about reading comprehension on the LSAT?
Is there anything different on the reading comprehension on the LSAT? Most of us have seen reading comprehension before on standardized tests. Of course, you've been reading since you were, two-ish. But you've been taking reading comprehension tests for a while. They were on the SAT or ACT, whichever of those you took. If you've taken other standardized tests, I don't know too many standardized tests that don't have a reading comprehension section. But the LSAT is the LSAT. And it's not just, well, this is for graduate school, so it's tougher, though that's true. The LSAT approach to reading comprehension is not about comprehension. It's really about the reading. And that's really what makes the LSAT stand out in terms of reading comprehension, is you're looking for, when you're answering one of these questions, and by the way, what you should expect is a passage, which is several hundred words, a column or so, followed by 6-ish questions, can be as few as 4, can be as many as 7 or so. Questions, again, multiple choice, about that passage. What you should expect is that the answer to each of those questions is found somewhere in the passage. Not exactly verbatim, but gosh darn close. And you've got to answer these things fast. But the way smart people get in trouble here is that they read the passage and they get it. And then they answer the question and they get what the question is asking. And they pick the answer choice that, oh yeah, that works, that makes sense. It's not right. It's according to the LSAT, it's not. The thing that totally makes sense is not the answer. The thing that the passage said is the answer. And that's kind of sort of true on all of the reading comprehension sections on all of the standardized tests you might take, with the partial exception of the MCAT. But it's absolutely true on the LSAT. What's required on the LSAT, speed as always, but absolute rigorous attention to finding it and convincing yourself it doesn't matter that it seems right. It matters that I find it.
For any of these sections, should I read the questions first and then look at the passage or the problem?
For any of these sections, should you read the passage for the questions first? A really different approach to the 3 kinds of questions. For example, on those infamous logic games, no. No. In fact, you're not going to look at the questions at all until you've done, for most of us, several minutes of work reading first the what we call the structure of the game, of the setup, and the clues, the things that determine what goes with what, and not just reading them, but actually doing a diagram, we would say, and doing a fair amount of work before you've read any of the questions. And then you go to one question, and then the next, and then the next, and the order in which you do the questions at that point doesn't matter a lot, because you're usually going to do all the questions about this particular game. The way that section is structured is there are 4 games that you're tasked to do within this 35 minutes. You might do 4, you might finish 3, you might finish 2, but once you've invested the time to set up a game, you're set to answer all those questions. So you do that. Reading comprehension is, for most people, pretty similar to that. Again, there are 4 reading comprehension passages and then several questions about each. So you invest the time to read the passage, and then you're answering questions about that. However, there's a difference. Some students, it's a minority, but some, actually get something from what we call previewing the questions before looking at the passage, to kind of get an idea what's going on. For most students, I think that's not a good approach. It's something that we need to try and so forth. It would be a good approach if there were more time, but there ain't a lot of time. So for most students, I wind up advising read the passage, although quickly, much more quickly than is comfortable, and then answer the questions. Finally, for the logical reasoning, the argument section, which really, although it doesn't get a lot of play in the press, as it were, it's the most important section. It's half the questions you're going to be graded on, and it really determines the difference between a good score and a great score. For many people, it determines the difference between fair and good. It's super important. For those, it actually absolutely makes sense, and for almost everybody, it's best to, I said, you've got a paragraph or so, and then a question about it. Everybody should start out by reading the question about it. Everybody. And you read the question about it, and that tells you what do you care about. Because it might be that you don't care about much of it. And I keep saying, you are under time pressure. You do not have time to screw around reading and understanding this paragraph if the answer is there. So you read the question first, you find the answer, and then you go to the answer choices.
Do I need to know any law in order to take the LSAT?
Do you need or know any law in order to take the LSAT? This is a question I've heard a lot, and luckily it's one of those questions I love to get because it's got a clear answer. No. No. In fact, not only did not need to know any law, you don't need to know anything except English. And to do well, you're going to need to know an approach to those game sections. But there is one of the 4 reading comprehension passages you're going to get is going to be about law. But it is going to be about one of the 4 exactly. And it's going to be about some law that ain't nobody taking the LSAT knows anything about. I mean, it's medieval rights to animal pelts, or it's some really obscure and now outdated approach to legal philosophy or something. It's designed, in fact, it's intended, as are all the reading comprehension passages, to be something that nobody taking the test will know anything helpful about. So there's nothing helpful to know. Similarly, on the arguments, you don't need to know anything. I mean, it becomes amusing what topics appear all the time. Like for several years, whoever's writing these questions obviously loves to talk about what killed the dinosaurs. What wiped the dinosaurs out. There was going to be, on an average test, a question about what wiped out the dinosaurs. But it didn't help to know what wiped out the dinosaurs, which, by the way, isn't agreed upon, which is why they keep having questions on it, because they were just using this as a structure, or rather as a something to discuss, something to have an argument about. So knowing the subject, some substance of it, I think arguably you could say it might even get in the way, although really it doesn't. So, all right, long-winded answer to the short question: do I need to know anything about law? No, you don't need to know about anything. Don't worry about that.
What are the 3 or 4 most important things to keep in mind when planning a strategy?
What are the 3 or 4 most important things in mind to keep in mind when planning a strategy? It depends on what we mean by strategy. If by strategy we mean what am I going to do on this section, it absolutely depends on what section we're talking about. There's the most important things to keep in mind on the games, which I've told you. You have to have a structure, a framework, and it matters so much more that you have one than it be the best one. In the past, I've taught people strategies that were designed by this company or that company or that company, some of which I don't think were all that great. But if it was what the person had already been studying, that it was more important simply to have the student be good at some structure than to have a totally optimized one. So you choose one and learn it. That's the most important thing on games. Most important thing on arguments. Most important thing on arguments. I'm going to do a video just on this. Is find the conclusion of the argument. And I know that seems obvious, and I know that seems like it should be easy, and it should be easy, but it isn't. And weirdly, it's harder for smart people than for not so smart people, because smart people are used to understanding what they're reading and what they hear and what people say. And so they read an LSAT argument and they're like, oh, I get it. The point is actually, it's not. The point is what it says. And this comes up in law school all the time too, interestingly. So the most important thing there is just learn to recognize that the argument doesn't say anything more than is written on the paper. In reading comprehension, the most important thing is learn to move your butt, and learn to go now. Answer the question now, seriously. And find it in the passage. I guess those are the 2. If you're asking what's the most important thing for a strategy to studying, which I think a lot of people want to know, it's probably not to make yourself crazy. 8 hours a day times 10 weeks sounds like a great idea, and it is not. It is way too much. It will make you crazy. It will burn you out. It will not improve your score. So the most important there is come up with a schedule with a reasonable amount of work per week. You don't have to work every day. And then stick with
surprises students most about the LSAT?
What surprises students most about the LSAT when they finally do take, finally or initially, whichever, their first actual full-length exam. It's by now you should know what I'm going to say. It's the time pressure. It's because most of the people taking the LSAT are good at tests. Maybe they breezed through their exams in college. Maybe they just didn't think the SAT was all that big a deal. Maybe they did, but they don't remember being under so much time pressure because they weren't. So that's what surprises people most. That's what surprised me, and I have been a test taker all my life. I love tests. Like, oh wow, you want homework? That stinks. But man, can I just take the final? Um, but but even on my LSAT, it's just stunningly high pressure that they expect you to answer this many questions in only that amount of time. And then the response to that is that actually they don't expect you to answer that many questions in that amount of time. That's the questions they put on there, and what they expect is that almost nobody will answer all of them. But that's really difficult and surprising for almost everybody. All right, so I hope this has been amusing, enlightening, interesting in some way. If you'd like more information or have more questions, go to my website, which is dougcouchman.com. Contact me there. In the meantime, thank you for watching.